It's interesting to eavesdrop on a prayer. And that's basically what we are doing in our gospel for today. Jesus is praying to the Father. He's praying to the Father for His disciples, the seeds of the church, the beginning DNA of the church, if you will. He's praying for them that they will be protected. Protected from the evil one, protected from everything that this world is going to throw at them. And in that protection, and in that prayer, Jesus says something that catches my eye. Because most of it is about, in this world, what He's basically saying is we are going to be swimming upstream. We are going to be going against the culture. We are going to be introducing something that is new, that is so new, that the world is going to hate us. But in the middle of that, of telling us it's not going to be an easy job, He says something that really I love. He says, I speak these things in the world so that they may have my joy made complete in themselves. It's going to be rough. It's not going to be easy. But Jesus is telling us it should be joyful. It's hard to put those two together. But when I think back, sometimes the hardest jobs that I've completed in my life, whether it was in the mill, whether it was doing a craft for the house or something, those hardest jobs, those most meticulous jobs, those jobs that probably gave me more anxiety, once they were completed, I probably had my most joy seeing those jobs completed. And so I thought, what gave Jesus joy? What gave Jesus joy in the world? And as I read through John, some of them popped out very easy. I think of the wedding in Canna, where this couple was about ready to fall short on the wine, and that was going to mark them with a stigma the rest of their lives in their village. In the marketplace, they'll hear the whispers. Oh, you know, there's Levi and Sarah. You know, the ones that ran out of wine at the wedding. Jesus knows what a stigma is. Do you remember the first time He preached in His hometown? Everything was going good until someone made the connection in the crowd. Hey, isn't that Joseph's son? You know, the common carpenter? Isn't that Mary's son? You know, Mary, Joseph, they had to get married. Jesus knows what a stigma is, and instead of letting that happen to this couple, He turned water into wine. And I can't help, somewhere along that wedding, He saw that couple dance and receive the blessings from the rabbi. He raised his glass and He smiled and thought, now that is my joy complete. And their joy. I think about Nicodemus. It doesn't seem like a joyful encounter, but I think Jesus, once He launched this Sanhedrin, this person from the Sanhedrin, this Pharisee, this dealer in understanding of the law, once He spun His head around, and instead of giving him a theological dissertation on the law that pointed to His authority as the Christ, He talked to him about birth, about wind blowing, about relationship building. And once He spun His head around and He went away with His mouth open, Jesus had to be smiling because He knew that Nicodemus was on a journey. A journey that He started him on. And he had to smile. Because that's not the last we hear of Nicodemus. We'll hear about Nick again when he stands up to the Hedron when they're trying to plot to do something against Jesus. And he stands up and he gives kind of a relational speech. And everyone on the Sanhedrin looks at him and goes, "Ah, you're sounding like one of those Galileans, Nick." And he sits back down. But his story's not done. Because the next time we hear about Nicodemus, he's with Joseph of Arimathea after the crucifixion to bury Jesus, but he brings 100 pounds of ointment. That's not something you slide under your robe and you go and you do it in private. That's a public parade, a caravan, if you will, of servants taking that 100 pounds of ointment to a grave to a person who was just crucified as a criminal. That's why I think 3 years ago, Jesus was smiling, because he knew Nick was on his journey. His joy was made complete. Sometimes that joy is made complete immediately. I think of the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. A woman who was ostracized to the edge of society, had to go to the well at noon because, she's had several husbands. As if a woman had a choice during that time period. She had several husbands, but it wasn't like she was jumping from one relationship to another. What we have to understand, there is only one reason that a woman could, actually two, that a woman could divorce her husband during that period of time. She had to catch him in the act of adultery with a witness, like that's going to happen. She had to be able to declare her husband as insane, and the only way you could be a blithering idiot, but your wife could not divorce you. The only way your wife could divorce you if you left the faith, because you had to be crazy to not want to be part of the children of God. And so she bounced around from relationship to relationship. It's not because that's what she wanted. That's the position society put her in. And that's why Jesus did not hammer her. I don't think he would have hammered her anyways, because he didn't hammer people struggling. He hammered people who were sure in their religious life. But anyways, he sits with this woman. He asks her about getting him a drink. He breaks down boundaries. And when she enters into a conversation, instead of ignoring him, which would have been the practice during that period of time with a Samaritan woman, Jesus enters into this conversation and leads her on a journey of joy, of understanding this fountain that has no end, this gushing water that is found within all of us. And that woman is immediately taken up in the joy. And even though this village ostracized her, even though it pushed her to the perimeter, pushed her to a noontime well trip, she runs down the middle of that village and she proclaims, "I have found the Messiah." And she brings the whole village out to see Jesus. I think that gave Jesus joy, because it gave joy of unity of a community in that village. I say this so that my joy will be complete within themselves. And I think, what do we as the church get joy out of today? Do we see how Jesus moved through the community and how creating those moments for wholeness, those moments of awareness of our relationship with God and all the possibilities that lie therein, do we see that that's what gave Jesus joy and made his life complete? And do we seize those as well, those opportunities? For me, serving others gives me a joy complete. For me, leading someone in understanding their relevance in the relationship with this Jesus Christ, and thus God, gives me great joy. I think back on my ministry, and I think of things like Camp Creation in Butler, and how that was such a wonderful experience, a joyful experience. It was hard getting all those churches to agree, and then throwing a synagogue in the middle of that. It was hard keeping it going. Sometimes it gave me some sleepless nights. But when you see an individual like John, who I told a story months ago, and I won't revisit it too much, but John, who had an opportunity of being a future street thug, ended up becoming one of the leaders and even joining a church and getting active in their Sunday school by the time we were done with our 5th year of Camp Creation. That gives you great joy. Or seeing little Emma going from a possible troubled teenager in her later elementary school years to becoming one of the leaders, one of the junior high and senior high leaders for Camp Creation. That gives you great joy. I remember the first fall after we had our first Camp Creation, and I remember Emma saw me in Walmart, and her and her sister and 2 or 3 of her friends, I can't remember exactly, came rushing up to me, Pastor Tim, are we going to have Camp Creation next year? And I said, yeah. I said, we're already talking with the other churches, and it looks like it's going to happen. And before I could say anything else, these 4 or 5 girls running down through Kmart or Walmart, down to their parents going, we're going to have Camp Creation, we're going to have Camp Creation. And then starting to break into one of the songs we taught them. I know I smiled that day. And I know Jesus did as well. And we just think about ways that we can reach out and that we can create those opportunities to understanding those relationships. And I think of Mets in English, and I look at that garden, and even though we're struggling to figure out how we're going to water that garden over on Mets in English, God is taking care of it. And it is starting to sprout, it is starting to grow, and I look forward to those relationships growing as well. I think of our prayer shawl ministry and the prayer shawls that I am able to share with our congregation and even those outside of our congregation at times. I think of the prayer shawl that I gave to one of the shut-ins who was at the hospital, and I remember receiving a phone call from her and saying that her spouse, her husband, is gazing longingly at her prayer shawl. And he asked, what does one have to do to get one? And I remember taking that prayer shawl to him and wrapping his shoulders in it and having a prayer. And seeing the look on his face. What a smile he gave me as I left that house that day. Restoring those relationships, reinforcing those relationships, giving places for those relationships to grow. I think of the backpack ministry that we're doing with St. David's, and I think of all those kids who have been going home for all those years that really had very little or the most unhealthy things you can imagine to stick in their mouths, and we have an opportunity to give them things that will get them through the weekends and give them some nutritional values that they need. And they know that that comes from a church. That comes from disciples of Jesus. And it gives us reason to smile. When I think about the gospel, and I think about the interactions of Jesus, I think about his bone and flesh and how he did that, and how he went and moved about the people. And yes, there were moments where his heart was broken and where he felt like no one seems to be listening. But in the end, an empire listened. Maybe not right away. It might have taken 300 years to get to that point. But it did listen. And Jesus was able to smile. And I think about the opportunities that we have, those things that I've mentioned, but those things that are unknown, those things that we have not discovered yet. As the school is being built, the opportunity for relationships with the teachers and with the teenagers that are going to be going to that school, the opportunities of reaching out to those families, the opportunities to show ourselves as relevant in the community. And I think about the opportunities and possibilities that we have. And I hope those opportunities and possibilities give us joy. And that joy is complete in ourselves and what God has called us from. It's not rocket science. It's really not that complicated. It does not mean that it is easy. I'm not saying that it's easy whatsoever. Relationships are risky. Relationships are messy. But relationships is what the church and what Jesus is about. If we think He came to just give us a theological dissertation on the relevance of His being here and what it means in the eschatological event that is going to take place eventually in the eternity that is going to fold after, we are people to be pitied. Because all of that is Jesus' realm. And He will and He has taken care of it. What He wants us to do is that joy that is complete in ourselves because of Him and what He has done and what He showed to us through His relationships and His life with His disciples and in that small area of the Middle East. He wants us to live that here and now in the completeness of our joy so that we can give joy to others. That's it. That's what the gospel is about. The question is, where do we find our joy? And where is it complete?